Welcome to Tell the Damn Story, the show that explores the many ways to navigate the successes and failures that aspiring and struggling writers face to make your journey that much easier.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Tell the Damn Story. This is a podcast where Alex Simmons, right there, and I, Chris Ryan, go through the challenges of writing so that your journey is smoother and has more informed and hopefully quicker than us. We're both 3,000 years old and we're just getting to this level, ladies and gentlemen. Luckily, Alex Simmons, at his ridiculously advanced age, has become a legend of writing because he has taken on so many challenges. And of course, because he's Alex, he has excelled. I myself have done many things, from being a local journalist to a teacher to both independent and traditionally published. And we're here to give all those millennia of experience.
Lovely girl, Millennia. Yes.
Yes, she's very nice.
Yeah.
I don't care what they say about it.
Hey,
So,
everybody.
Yeah. What are we going to talk about today,
first
Alex?
off, let me
I
just
have
say,
no idea.
Yeah, of course, Chris. Of course, he has no idea. None was. He's been asleep for the past 2-3 weeks. But anyway, folks, great to see you. Great to have you listening to us and all that. Today,
See my face.
we're going to be talking about a really fun subject. And Chris, you're ready for this. I know you're ready for it. But first, what we're going to do is you're going to learn what would authors learn from a project that Chris did himself, a book that Chris wrote himself, a book called It's Been a Privilege.
Oh, you mean these right here?
Yeah, those right there. That's right. And this is not just a book. It's not just a nonfiction book or a fiction book that's a straight writing, straight prose. There's a technique that Chris has employed in this particular book. So, most assuredly, what authors can learn from the particular styling that Chris used from this book, that's one of the things you're going to find out today. You're also going to find out what are some of the challenges of marketing such a unique book as this. And if you stick around until the end, you're going to learn 5 things that an author can discover. Just learn about the process from an experiment such as the one Chris undertook in writing It's Been a Privilege. So here we are, folks. And Chris, now you know what it is we're going to be talking about.
I'm telling you, I am shocked.
Yes,
shocked at the coincidence of having a wall full of copies of It's Been a Privilege.
That's right.
So you
remember what Alex. He wrote. Right? All right. So Chris, first off, now that I've so blatantly hinted, if one can do blatant and hint in the same sentence, what is this unique styling that I'm alluding to? What makes this particular book, this particular story, the challenge that it was for you to write?
It's Been a Privilege is a horror story told entirely in verse. And I have to tell you, if I'm completely honest, it was a complete accident. To explain that accident.
Just for the folks who are going, what? Yeah, yes.
I'll very quickly explain that accident. Yeah. So there's another show on YouTube called Galactic Terrors. And it's a horror reading show. What I mean by that is horror writers come on the show, about 3 per episode, and they read from whatever their current works are or something. It's sponsored by Horror Writers Association, the New York chapter, and 2 of the friends of the show, James Chambers and Carol Geisandra, are the co-hosts and that kind of stuff. But one time, and this was a while ago, a writer named Sarah Tantlinger was on and reading. She did a book about the serial killer from the Chicago World's Fair. And there was something about Sarah, about what she was reading, how she was reading it, that I always have index cards around. I just started grabbing them and just writing. It was just ideas that were not about Chicago or the World's Fair or that killer, but they would, I think 3 or 4 poems came flying out in the
While
five
she's
ten
reading
minutes,
her,
5 to 10 minutes that she was reading. Yeah. And they were told from a very strong point of view, the point of view character I hadn't met yet. I didn't know the character's name. I just realized this character represents the most modern of villains, rich white privilege,
so
particularly male
let,
rich
let me
white privilege.
just fine tune this again. So literally, you are listening to this reading.
Yeah.
You suddenly got this inspiration, this very sort of sporadic inspiration. I say sporadic because, as you just said, you didn't know who the character was yet. You hadn't worked out any of the backstory, anything like that. Just these images or these thoughts were coming to you, and you're
And they
jotting
were
them down on your
yeah,
5x7s.
they were fully realized. They were in a very strong character voice, and there was murder afoot. I think by the time the episode was finished, I had gone from 3 or 4 or 5 poems to almost 10. And they got rewritten, polished a bit, and that kind of stuff. But I said, all right, the question became just like it's the same question I use when anytime ideas start piling up on index cards. Who is this person? And I started seeing, feeling, I started realizing what music would play in the background, and that this character wouldn't be listening to that music. He'd be more of a snob and pretend to listen to classics, classical as it were. But really, the soundtrack was disturbed. Bands like that, it just fit him really well. So I did a playlist and I walked around, and the poems flew out in I think most of the novel or novel in verse or novelette in verse flew out in a week, 10 days. And then there was, I always believe the best part of writing is rewriting. So in rewriting that, I would see holes in the story. And then that's when I turned for some help because I'm a fan of Charles Bukowski, who is free verse, gritty, cool, something that would be said as a bore is the kind of poetry I tend to write. But that wouldn't always fit for this guy. I started learning more and more about him. One of the last things I learned about him was his name. But
Your character.
my character, yeah,
Yeah.
I couldn't find his name. Like the guy wouldn't tell me. But I went to this book here, Writing Poetry in the Dark by Stephanie M. Wojtowicz, forward by Tim Wagoner. Wagoner is a horror writer and writing teacher who has written a couple of Writing in the Dark books, couple of volumes, his teaching and all that stuff. But he was gracious enough to say, yeah, you can add to the series with poetry. So Writing Poetry in the Dark was a group of people writing essays. And what I went into that for, I went specifically, I was reading it for self-education. I read these kind of books all the time for self-education. But I remember that they had explained different styles and formations of poetry that I didn't write naturally. So I would go and I would study that particular style. And my question was, were there styles in here that would fit this character's personality? The conceit of the book is that it's a poetry journal written by a serial killer, a rich, white, male, privileged serial killer, for his eyes only, and that he fancies himself one of the world's most excellent poets. But if you read this book, that is not true.
So this is a comment that I was waiting for because again, up until this point, it had not been stated in the episode that literally the story of this character, what he does in this book, and what happens is told through these journal entries, these poetic journal entries.
Right.
So there's no narrative to then create a context around each of these. There's not a separate narrator saying, and he went into the building and blah, blah, blah. Each page that we're reading is as if we're reading his journal and we're reading his poetry. And from these poems, we are gaining insight into what had happened or what he's thinking or what he's
Right.
feeling. And that's why we call this a bit of an experiment.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
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 And it became really engaging to me as a writer. How can I tell this story? Because there's part of the writing experience where I was like, this is a Mallory and Gunner detective story told from the murderer's point of view. And eventually, there are detectives mentioned in here, but I never name them. I know
Mm-hmm.
who they are. They're Mallory and Gunner. But this guy doesn't know. And he's part of his personality is to hate anyone who would oppose him.
You think?
I don't know where I would get that from current events. It fit the profile. And that's one of the things I said, all right, what do I need? What don't I need? I don't need the detectives' names. If there are for the fan out there who has read Mallory and Gunner and is interested in what else I could do, when they read this, they'll be like, that's not only will they recognize those two, the determination of those two detectives as being familiar, but there's one or two times when the narrator or the speaker of the poems quotes the detectives, and you can recognize from the cadence which character it is if you know that much, but you
Mm-hmm.
don't need it. This is an experience that stands on its own. And the tone of each poem, whether it's he's in the thrall of his latest conquest or explaining the deeper delusion of his holy duties, or maybe being a little perverse or failing and clearly talking his way out of having to face that failure. Again, I don't know why that seems so current. Don't know. So there are some times where the open free verse poetry style wasn't going to fit. And I started asking, are there other forms that would fit this style or that style? And there were a couple. There's a triangle poem that he has this tendency to self-doubt and gets down on himself and then talk himself up almost evangelically. And that worked well with that style. There's a split in his thinking that wound up working really well with parallel poems and then breaking it further with competing, what is it called? Haikus, competing
Mm-hmm.
haikus, because of where he was medicinally,
Figuratively.
physically, psychologically, that the chopped quality of a
Fragmented.
haiku worked really well.
Yeah.
So it became in the rewriting process, especially, what forms of poems could I utilize to help tell the story?
Let me just even clarify that a bit more. I've read it twice now.
What a guy.
Yeah.
Thank you,
First
sir.
off, it's an intriguing piece across the board. Secondly, and this is what I was going to go to, is the poems, certain poems in particular, definitely reflect the frame of mind that the character is in at that moment. He's delusional throughout in certain ways, thinking of himself as this and that. But even within that sphere of the mindset, there's a fragmentation that's going on, like you said, and it's almost like another personality. And at times they're at war with each other. There's a struggle there.
Yeah.
And again, you chose. the poetic style, and then within that style chose phrasings and comments and elements that really help bring out in that simple form. Because again, we don't have full narratives, we don't have pages and pages of description here. Within that simple expressive form, we are getting an action, we're getting an emotional state of being, and we're getting a mental state of being.
Yeah.
And you're hitting all three of those bells in something that barely at times, barely a page, if not like a half page or a quarter page.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that makes it such a challenge, A, for the writer, which obviously you took on, but also for the readers, because for me, it was you can read the poems as poems. And if you wanted to read them as disconnected entries and just look at each one as a separate thing. But once you start to just go along for the ride and realize this is this character's journal, it just opens up a whole nother aspect of the experience. And it's really fascinating. And I really wanted to
Thank
ask
you for
you,
that.
yeah, it's thank you for putting in the time and the effort on it. I really wanted to ask you, again, you've written, you talked about the Mallory and Gunner books, but you've also written Genius High, you've written Blackjack, you've written a number of short stories. I think you've even done some microfiction. So
Yeah.
you've tackled a lot of the different arenas of fiction writing. What made this different for you? I'm sure it's not just the poem. What other aspect made creating this character and telling this story different?
A couple of things. One, I sat down to watch an episode of Galactic Terrors and for my enjoyment. So I didn't see this coming at all. And then when the first one came, and what happens, you all know out there, an idea hits you, or a line, or excuse me, my dog's having a nightmare, so I gotta give him a little rubbing, or a character, and you start developing from there. But I was just getting these lines coming out, and I said, let me just write this, and I'll put it to the side. If it bothers me, I'll do something with it. But then I filled up that index card, another one, and then the next poem came, and the next poem came. So I realized that this was a burst and that it was all the same voice. But I don't subscribe to the idea that first idea, best idea. So I put them to the side. And it was like the next morning over tea, another poem came. And it was the same person. I didn't even know the person's name yet. But so I started, at a certain point, I said, okay, so who are you? What is this? And all the things that happen, every one of us as writers, there are things that happen when we know we're on a new project. For me, I start, you know how this is a Bronx tradition, so you know, Alex, but you're telling a story to someone and you slip into a character voice for the effect, right? This person's voice kept popping up and spouting a line or two or what. I started carrying index cards and writing them down and started saying, okay, what is this going to be? And because I write so much prose, I tried to say, then how would this be a prose project? Is he going to be a poetry spouting person running around a prose story? And that seemed absurd. What somehow seemed less absurd was that it was going to be all poetry. And I had to make my peace with it being free verse, mostly free verse, because I'm not a trained poet. I've written a bunch of poems, but again, more style of Charles Bukowski than without all the alcohol or sexism, but that free verse, that very casual, and it would have been a casual Bronx cadence, but this character kept insisting on a slightly different, almost my teaching cadence back in my teaching days when a supervisor was in the room observing. and I wouldn't crack as many jokes. I wouldn't do as many character voices. I would be known in school to occasionally to make a point, break into a nice Irish, a terrible brogue or something. And I wouldn't do that when the supervisor's there because context, they may not enjoy it. But this guy kept insisting on his own particular cadence, which is not haughty and not supremely well educated, but definitely a person of privilege who believes himself to be much more polished than he might be and much better at everything than he really is.
And we'll just keep rolling
Yeah.
that one.
So occasionally he breaks into pretty solid form of different poems, but his go-to, his baseline poetry is open verse.
Okay.
When at one point he gets very nervous, and for a verse or two, it's almost hip hop, almost rap, but like what a white guy of privilege would do.
Who has no
Not
concept of the actual art form. Yes, gotcha.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like
Yeah.
Dre or anybody breaking bars down on us. No, doesn't even sound like Omar, friend of the show, Omar Holman. You know how he can go, and there's
Yep.
just a style to
Yep.
this. It was just really obvious, bouncy rhymes.
So you're in effect, what you shared makes it sound like, and I'm not getting spiritual here, but it makes it sound almost like you were channeling someone in that way that this voice was talking to you. These pieces were coming to you with this very specific voice, this very specific attitude.
And I would say, I would respond to that by saying to you, so do you, right? Because when you write Blackjack, it absolutely sounds like Blackjack. But your Batman sounds like Batman, and your Scooby Doo sounds like Scooby Doo. Your Sherlock Holmes, to reference our latest project from you, it's absolutely 100% Sherlock Holmes. I think that it's a good thing to allow for writers or creatives to allow the character to embody them. I've done acting on occasion, and I commit to the words that are there. Maybe not the directions 100%, but to the words that are there. That's what informs my character. On occasion, I have stunned directors by. I did one in a local playhouse where I was a character named Vinny Bavasi in a Neil Simon comic or a play. And people came backstage afterwards. So when I said hello, they were really disappointed that I wasn't really from Brooklyn. I did a thing with our friend Dave where it was a series of skits of the worst online dates ever. And I show up as the father of the date this girl was supposed to have. And she thinks I'm trying to move in and pick her up. But what I'm there to do is to tell them that this guy got hit by a car. And even in his last hours, he was worried that you would be left here alone. And he made me promise I would come and apologize that to you that he got hit by a car and that he couldn't keep the date. And being the dad of that guy, every take I was able to cry without, it's embodying the character. And I think writers, the more they do that, the more they really know characters. Like Stephen King's not walking around with big glasses and a dress on or something, as Holly, his character that is slightly on the spectrum, a little bit OCD, a little bit of some other troubles, but keeps blooming more and more each story. But he fully embodies, when you're reading that, you know who Holly is. And that's what every writer hopes to do. When Harry took me over for this period of time, I didn't go around.
When did he finally tell you his name?
Almost at the end. It was like one of the last poems. And a matter of fact, at this point, he had a complication. And he had another name for the complication. and a name for himself. And it was in that line that the name showed. I was, oh, that's his fucking name. Nice to meet you. Yeah. But the whole challenge was, can I tell this extended story through poetry without cornballing it, without saying, in this poem, we'll be finding out this part of the tale. And that's why the idea of a poetry journal presented itself.
Mm.
It's a slightly modern take on an epistolary novel or something, where it's all letters or this and that. I have some experience with that from writing Ransom for a Dead King with you. The Blackjack story, which was all letters home
and communications,
from a hilarious character who had no business being with Blackjack.
And loving it, yes.
Yeah. So that combination of serving the story and serving the character, and then looking to educate myself on the nuances of poetic style, and consciously looking for styles that I didn't know about, but that I thought I could either get down or approximate to serve a particular part of the story.
It also helps that this guy is not as brilliant a poet as he thinks he is. Because, so then you needed to gain as much information as you could in order to convey the feeling, the styling, and all that. But it wasn't necessary that you be award-winning poet himself, yourself, in order to pull off these things. Let me move forward.
That's one of the reasons why that presented itself, was because it would be ridiculous, I think, for this character to be that good at that and that good at killing. It didn't seem, the entire journal is just ego stroke. And he doesn't even realize that the story is turning on him. Yeah. Which I just found delicious.
So let me pursue a couple of things, as we promised the audience a couple of things. Here, first off, just a quick question, very quick. How long did it take you to write this?
I would say, with all rewrites and stuff, a month to 6 weeks.
Okay. And because a lot of it was just coming.
Yeah, it was slamming through.
Yeah.
So the initial
poetry slam,
draft.
Reference.
Yeah. The initial draft was probably 10 days. And the other 4 weeks plus was polishing, looking for gaps in the story where another poem was needed. Once or twice, another poem jumped out, and then I had to find a place for it. And then the idea there was, it was such a fertile concept that if I turned the morning news on while I was making my tea, I would be like, how would they react to him? What would that be? And who could pursue them? This guy. Mm-hmm. And I realized I had that in my back pocket. And then I actually trimmed them back a lot in that second part, the rewrite part, which was about 4 weeks long. So it's mostly Harry.
So you trimmed back the detectives.
Yeah, because knowing their names, giving them speaking roles, with one exception. This character's personality wouldn't allow them a bigger role.
Not in his journal. Yeah.
No. Yeah. And again, the idea was to tell the story quickly so that it's a page turner and you're enjoying the poems. And if there's something that struck you, you can hang out on that poem for a while, then
move on.
Off you go. Yeah.
So now the other question was, you had said in particular that there was something to be learned about what kind of marketing challenges that one encounters with this kind of book.
Yeah. Let's think about the clash of styles here, right? This is a crime story, right? This is a serial killer story. So that's an audience that expects one prose, expected to be told most of the time from the police point of view or the investigator's point of view. a large and varied cast. And did I say before? Let's say it again. Prose.
Yes.
So here's poetry, and it's a horror story told in verse. And it's also a crime story told in verse. So that's the first level of marketing challenges. Can you get readers to give it a chance? Can you get crime writers or crime readers to give it a chance? Because they might say, "Oh, poetry. I'm not going to read a bunch of sonnets." There's not a sonnet in the book, baby. Yeah, and that's a marketing challenge. That was one that was foreseen. And I said, okay, I'm willing to take on that challenge. And we're moving into the next phase where I'm going to openly ask. There's a couple of places. Our friend Damon Manx has one of his pages on Facebook is expressly for the horror community. And you can go there and say, hey, here's my new book. I will go there and say, listen, I need to prove that this is a very readable thing. There are people willing to give it a try and comment on it. I'll send you a few copies. So I'll be doing things like that. But then there's a second level of marketing challenge that I did not foresee. This is published by Alien Buddha Press. And like Simmons and Company and Seamus and Nunzio, 3 small presses that publish most of our stuff, is sold on Amazon. And this was accepted by Alien Buddha Press, and the date for publication was agreed. It was March 31st it came out. And then like last week in February, beginning of March, whatever, a very vocal Save Our Democracy type organization convinced the good portion of America to stop shopping on Amazon. So that's a situation, right? And I spoke with Red, who is the publisher of Alien Buddha Press, about it. And he says, well, buy a bunch of extra copies and offer to sell them direct, signed copies. So I've just gotten those, and that'll be another way to try and face that challenge. 2 things that you writers can learn today about different challenges.
Yes, absolutely.
We're already giving you those bonuses, baby.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have to. He's trying to get it on other sites. Eventually, he'd love to see it on Barnes & Noble and that kind of stuff. We'll see what happens. That takes a while to get through those. In the meantime, if someone on here is saying, I want a signed copy, then they can get in touch with me through one of my various social media DMs. So make a comment here, contact me, I want a copy, and then we'll take care of that. So you kind of roll with the punches on those things after you commit to the art, to the story.
I want to do, because I'm also aware of our time and
yes, sir.
I want to just add one other little thing to the market, and then we'll go to the last question. Have you done any readings or personal appearances to help?
Well, yeah, I did 2 readings for Alien Buddha Press's YouTube page, and they also put it on all their social media pages. And Alien Buddha Press, thank God, has a pretty strong readership community among fellow poets, and Alien Buddha Press publishes a lot of stuff, and those people stay around, and there's a bit of a support, trying to get some support from HWA. I got a great blurb from Teal James Glenn, who said that I just knocked him out and all that sort of stuff. And then another guy I know, legendary writer, he sees it as a one-man show, which is theatrical experience of some kind, which is fascinating. As a matter of fact, I sent a copy to another actor.
That legendary writer is right. I think with the right actor, it would be a tour de force piece. It really would.
Yeah.
Because there are wheels within wheels in terms of the mind of this character, and those are various levels to play emotionally and otherwise. So I think that would be something.
I sent a copy to an actor that I thought, 1, would be kind enough to read it and give me an honest opinion, but 2, he would be perfect for the role. So we'll see what happens.
Yes, keep us posted on that. So then the other thing, actually, I'm sorry, quickly.
Yes, sir.
You said
yes, sir.
You said that in doing the readings, one of them or all of them were recorded and are
I
available.
did some that I recorded for Alien Budapest, and you can see them on my YouTube page. You can see them on my
Okay,
social media. You
that's
can
what
see
we'll
them
have
on
links.
Alien Budapest.
We'll have
Yeah,
links to
right.
those in the
Ones you
comments.
don't have links to are live ones that I did, but they have to Valentine's Day at in the Village at the Shade Bar. A really great place to see live readings. There's a picture on my social media of me. There you go. That's not the
Hanging
same
out with them.
thing.
Right,
Not the
right.
same thing. And Alien Budapest also did something on their WordPress blog that then they shared where they actually printed four of the poems from different parts of the book, which I thought was really cool. And I'm going to recreate. I wanted to give them some time, and I'll take and recreate those for my
Okay.
own social media. But
So again, in bringing this to a final informative conclusion, we had said at the beginning that people would learn at least five things, and you actually
mm,
dropped a couple already.
yeah,
The marketing. What else could you share?
I think the first thing that I somehow did right
Yes, you did.
is
You wrote it, right?
is that
Right? Yeah.
when that initial inspiration came, I didn't ignore it and reject it. I just was open enough to say, all right, let me write it down quick while I'm listening to Sarah. And if it goes anywhere, I knew what I was writing, but I grew up left-handed in Catholic schools, so it's chicken scratch. And I wasn't even sure if I was going to be able to read something coherent afterwards, but it held up. So that's the first thing is that no, when you get blessed with some kind of inspiration, write it down. Don't judge it because it could suck. Many of the things I've written down, many sounded great when the ink was going across the page. But a day or two later, I read it and said, and that's where you're just like, go to sleep. So that's the first thing is that just go with your inspiration. Don't judge it. See what happens. The second thing was I wanted to know why this particular piece that Sarah was reading hit me with such inspiration. So I got a copy of it and read. So self-educate, be open to stuff like that. I'm still very thankful to Sarah. Sarah Tantlinger, go and read some of her stuff. Great stuff. The second thing was if a creative idea continues to bug you, let that one in. I was in the middle of another project, two other projects. I'm still servicing my COVID obsessions of rewriting all the books that I had so far to make them the best they could be. So, scheduling wise, I shouldn't have entertained this project.
Mm.
But I believe you have to be open. And if it keeps bugging you, it's that Stephen King thing. Let them fight it out. And the one that really is insistent tends to be something that has some legs. The third thing is a gem from the old days. We've
Mm.
always said this, serve the story. So this story presented itself in verse. So for me, the challenge to consider was, can that be done? Yes, should it be done? Is it abhorrent? And I did have fun with it. I allowed myself to have fun with this character who was unlike anyone else that I've written. And then I did, again, educate yourself. If this was a Shakespearean drama, I would have to refresh my knowledge of the nuances of that. If this was a Holmesian mystery, it would require something else. This was, all right, it was going to be all in verse. I wanted to change some of it up. Are there forms that I may not be aware of because I haven't studied poetry my whole life? And this and a few other books gave me some clues. And then I started thinking, all right, what forms of poetry could serve the beats that I know of? And I knew there was a part where the main character is suffering so much that it would be a short thought would be about all he could handle. Haiku lent itself to that very much. Then you're playing with the styles. to serve the story. Everything always has to serve the story. And then marketing. I wanted some other company to consider this. Just because if someone says, yeah, this is worth the effort to publish, then it's just not my insanity. It's his insanity too. And then the marketing challenges where, okay, just because it's off the beaten path format wise, that shouldn't be a no. It should be, okay, so what do you do about it?
Yeah.
And
how do I make this happen?
Yeah, the first person you have to write for is yourself. And then when you realize this is something you want to share with the world, that's when all those other things kick in. How can I make it the best thing that it can be and still be true to itself? And then then ask all your gods to give you some luck that someone like Rebecca Cuthbert will bless you with an intriguing cover that matches the elements within the story, within the poems. And Rebecca kicked it out of the park. Very cool. For what it's worth.
Oh, okay. We're going to be coming back to this in a couple of weeks because there's a few more things that I think we can glean from this experience, but we need a couple of weeks to let that play out. So we'll come back to this in a couple of weeks, but I definitely wanted to have an opportunity to talk to you about this. And I, for one, definitely applaud the experiment and the outcome.
Well, thank you, sir.
I think you did a really good job. And as I said, I've read it twice. And folks, I've known Chris for umpteen many decades, and I've read almost everything he's written. And literally, this is one of the best things he's ever written.
My wife says the same thing.
Yeah.
Gloria says this is her favorite. This is the best thing I've ever written.
Yeah. And
I gave her another project recently that she said, oh, this is really good. We should move forward with this. And then later on in the car, I said, what's your favorite things I've ever written? And she went back to this.
Yeah. Once again, there can be more than one.
Sure.
We're not talking about the Highlanders here. There can be more than one. But the favorite is the favorite. And I just have to say that this is definitely the best thing that I've seen of your writing. And
yeah, it's strong enough that I feel like it deserves a wider audience than it might normally get because I think
see how that can be made manifest. Okay.
Yes, we're trying.
All right. Any parting words you want to share with folks before we say arrivederci?
Everybody says follow your dreams and all that sort of stuff. That can get you in a lot of trouble.
Good. Roll up your sleeves and let's go.
Write the stuff that insists on being written. And you'll know it. It's a baby. I've never been pregnant. I've been around a lot of pregnant women, and they know when it's time to go to the hospital. They know it's really inspiration. It's a very natural thing. It's when I pick up a pen and Alex picks up a pen, I pick mine up with my left hand. Never think of it. He picks his up with his right hand. He never thinks of it. It's just natural. Same thing goes with, I'm going to write this story. Why? Because it just feels natural. I'm avoiding it feels right because every one of us can convince ourselves that the worst idea feels right. This is the classic. That's when your ego starts saying, but when it feels natural, when you almost, it's harder to not write it than it is to write it, then write it. Just go ahead. And then worry about how you're going to make it work. That's the
work out the other moves. Yeah, work out the other moves afterwards.
You should always run to craft. Craft is so much fun.
Folks, if you enjoyed hearing Chris pontificate on what was a great experiment, and if you want to hear more, not only from the past, but from the future, then please, I get to do this week. Hit that button, hit that and subscribe so you can keep coming back to Mo and Mo tell the damn story.
And if you loved Alex's work, buy him a cup of coffee at the link below.
That's right. Do that, please. Buy two. They're small. Okay.
There you go. There you go, then.
Yeah. So I'll be thinking about this later, man.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody. Take care,
Live
Chris.
long and prosper. Peace. Give this a try.